Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for your patience while we set Diana's Prezi up this afternoon. This afternoon, Diana will be presenting on high-achieving individuals versus high-achieving teams, understanding the importance of social capital in developing successful teams. So I'm going to pass straight over to Diana to get going. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this Verimed webinar today. I'm Diana Stewart and I'm the Programming Manager here at Verimed. I'm going to be talking today about ways in which we can build a high-achieving team and the difference between a high-achieving individual and a high-achieving team. But firstly, I'm going to tell you a short story. So a few years ago, a naive, relatively inexperienced junior programmer was in a meeting to discuss the programming status on the study she was working on, and to her immense discomfort, she found herself on the pointy end of some aggressive criticism about the task she was currently working on. And the person giving out this criticism was the technically brilliant, shiny new contract programmer who'd been doing some study familiarization. And she had two immediate concerns. One was how she was going to survive the mortal embarrassment of what had just happened to her, and the other was how on earth she was going to explain herself to her manager. But actually the outcome was somewhat different to what she expected, and there was actually support for the knowledge gap, the now evident knowledge gap, and the contract programmer was actually the one who was explaining himself to the programming manager. And in fact, he almost lost his contract. Now, obviously I am the inexperienced programmer in this story, and it was the first time that I realized something, and it was that team working experience, my team working experience from previous jobs, and they were non-programming jobs, was considered to be of value. And the company I was working for recognized that value and the contribution that I was making. And I also realized that no matter how brilliant you are, you do not get to ride roughshod over other people without consequences. Companies spend an awful lot of time and effort trying to recruit the best people. And if you spend all this time and effort recruiting the best, it's a bit of a puzzle if the team doesn't meet your expectations. The successful teams have cohesion, they collaborate, they are innovative, and they are efficient. And social capital can have a really important role to play in the improvement of cohesion in teams. So we need to know how to grow social capital. When we're developing our team members or recruiting, we need to know how to recognise individuals who already display qualities for growing social capital in others, or have the potential to grow social capital. We could be forgiven for feeling that life is a competition, even in the workplace. And we experience competitiveness from a really early age, whether we're trying to win races as a 5-year-old on a school sports day, whether we're sitting exams, entrance exams to get into the right secondary school, trying to get onto school sports teams. We do our national exams, we're trying to get into universities, and then we're trying to get into the job market. We're really made to feel the heat of competition against one another, and there's actually a bit of a price to pay for that, because for one person to win, another must lose, the zero-sum game. And we have to put our personal feelings aside and focus on our goal. But once we've achieved our goal, that job we desire, the place on the team, what next? How does this competitiveness translate to the world of employment? Does the drive to be the best work well in a team? Well, competitiveness does have its place, but evidence suggests that we should also be teaching other skills at a young age, such as skills to grow social capital. So I'm not exactly a sports fan, but I fully understand what Casey Stengel is saying here. National sports teams are perhaps a good example. Something like the England football team, or actually any national football team, but I'll use the England football team as an example. On paper, the team looks like they should be successful, perhaps a lot more successful than the results that they have actually achieved. And could a lack of cohesion and the feelings that individuals need to prove themselves as superstars be the reason behind a less successful national team? And we've all come across high achievers in our lives, and in our world that might be in the form of ambitious programmers who have amazing coding skills and seem to know it all. And in our workplaces, how often, though, we are organised into teams and we deliver as teams. And having an individual that is excessively competitive in a team can actually be counterproductive. There can be a detrimental effect on the team's productivity or their ability to innovate or their ability to problem solve. In the extreme, an overly competitive programmer who wants to be the star of the team may actually undermine the confidence of other team members. So I keep mentioning social capital. So what is it exactly? Well, the dictionary type definition is that social capital is the networks of relationships among people who live and work in a particular society, enabling that society to function effectively. And another similar definition is networks together with shared norms, values and understandings that facilitate cooperation within or among groups. It's not a new term. References to social capital can be found throughout the last century. Essentially, it is about building connections to each other and in turn building trust. And trust is really at the centre of social capital. You'll hear words like reliance and interdependency, which are all about building trust. But very simply put, social capital is talking to one another, listening to one another, understanding one another, and really making use of the benefits that those things bring. Benefits like establishing trust, sharing knowledge, shared norms, asking for help, giving help. Social capital is about creating an environment that makes people feel brave enough to share and constructively criticise and to want to help one another. Social capital is obviously quite a large subject, so I'm just going to touch on a couple of elements which I consider to be the most important. And the first one is listening. And we all think we're great listeners, right? And that's what my other half says too, except when he can't recall a conversation that we've had, and it's quite a frequent occurrence. And he claims domestic deafness. And this is another way of saying he pretends listens. And to be fair, I do it too. It's something we tend to do in a domestic environment, but it's not something we would want to experience when we're in our work environment. We want to be listened to, especially when we're trying to get our ideas across. Actually, many of us are pretty bad listeners. Often we're just waiting our turn to say what we want to say. We should all practice effective listening, because if we don't listen, we can miss out on so much. Listening is important because without it, we miss out on things, new ideas, developing ideas, building on ideas, important feedback. And really, does one individual, one superstar know-it-all have all the answers? The reality is that better solutions come from a group of people and listening to the opinions of others. Now, I mentioned earlier about evidence suggests that we should be teaching other skills at a young age. And around the time I was preparing this presentation, I had a conversation with my 8-year-old niece about working in groups in school, which she is doing. And she listed for me the reasons why working in groups was so beneficial, including the pooling of ideas and listening to everyone, because you just may miss the best idea if you don't listen to everyone. So effective listening is a really important skill to develop, but not only develop, you need to practice it. Feeling listened to is an important aspect of building trust. And just as important as effective listening is creating an environment where individuals can speak and be listened to. And this needs to be somewhere that's safe and equal, where everyone can talk and no one person is dominant. People want to be open, and feeling listened to encourages openness. If we don't listen, we aren't open to new ideas and we can miss many opportunities. We learn from our mistakes, so we need to listen to constructive criticism. Empathy in this context is essentially seeing the world through the eyes of others. You don't need to agree with that view, but you should have an understanding. As with listening, empathy contributes to the building of trust. If an individual feels that others understand where they are coming from, they are much more likely to have the courage to share their own ideas. Appreciation of another person's point of view can actually be invaluable. What challenges are they facing? What reservations do they have? What are their motivations? What fears are they trying to overcome? All of these types of questions can lead to better solutions. And having an understanding of each other's challenges can also lead to a different point of view. In addition, rather than just having an idea that possibly just deals with one challenge, by taking into account other perspectives, an idea could address far more issues. In order to create an environment which allows the development of social capital, the changes can be small, and developing social capital in-house skills can actually be far more straightforward than you might think, because making small changes can have a big impact. And I took a lot of inspiration and really recommend Margaret Heffernan's TED book, Beyond Measure, which I found inspiring. So social capital is not about everybody being great friends with one another. It's about making connections and becoming more connected. And that doesn't happen if we don't talk to one another, particularly if we stay firmly in our own little bubbles. So the types of small changes we could make could be things like encouraging people to make coffee and tea together, having a hot desking environment, and enforce a policy where people aren't allowed to eat lunch at their desk, so people eat in a communal room. If offices are in geographically different locations, we can present to one another about our locations, and we can present to each other about one another. And we need to level the playing field to give everyone an equal voice in team meetings. We can rotate the roles or make a point of the most senior team member not speaking. I think that as people in technical roles, we can be a little dismissive of the soft skills training that we're offered, possibly feeling that it's not relevant to us. But we are probably amongst those that we can get the most benefit from training courses, such as active listening, giving and receiving feedback, assertiveness. Learning these skills gives people the confidence to practice the elements that contribute to social capital. And the point of getting people to be more connected is to build trust and to give people the courage to speak up. The hope is by connecting people, it could lead to innovation. Maybe the seed of an idea can be grown more effectively and successfully with the input of many people. And solutions, because rarely is the first idea the solution. Solutions are born from a gathering of opinions and ideas. There could be disaster avoidance, because fear of looking stupid could easily override the want to speak up about a possible risk factor. Efficiencies, because people will ask for help and give help, which leads to knowledge sharing and efficiencies. If someone is intent on finding a solution on their own, let's say by means of research, and rather than seeking out someone who has experience and can share that experience, they could actually be wasting a lot of unnecessary resource. So this isn't actually my tips and tricks on interviewing. What I'm going to talk a little bit about is what we might be looking for in individuals when we want to build a successful team. So firstly, I will ask you this: who are you recruiting exactly? And this is not a question about the role type that you're trying to fill, but the individual you are considering as a team member. When you do invite somebody to interview, who are you interviewing? Are you interviewing someone who is a mirror of yourself? And it is in fact extremely natural that we do this. We are attracted to people with similar backgrounds, with similar educations, with similar interests, because people like people that are like themselves. It is easy to compare your candidate's values and beliefs and attitudes to your own and use that as a mechanism for interviewing. But the issue with this is, if you surround yourself with like-minded individuals, there is nothing to challenge the prevailing opinion. And the problem with not challenging the prevailing opinion is not anticipating what could happen if the prevailing opinion is wrong. So I'm not suggesting that we all interview to recruit a permanent devil's advocate, but we should consider whether individuals are able to constructively challenge opinion. We humans are pre-programmed to conform, to go with the majority, to say what they think people want to hear. So it might be a good idea to look at diversity in experience and background in our team. And diversity is good because if everybody brings the same knowledge and ideas to the table, then why are we having the discussion at all? The aim of the discussion is to explore different points of view, build on ideas, and to reach a common agreement and understanding. Now, the line manager's role is really to serve their line reports. And line managers need to be excellent listeners, and they need to be able to put themselves in the shoes of others. And they need to encourage an environment of trust so that constructive feedback is easy and normal, and importantly, is two-way. Now, Google undertook a project called Project Oxygen, which was a project with aims to find out what their successful managers did. And what they found was that whilst line reports did expect some level of expertise, it was way down on the list of what was most important to them. What was far more important and near the top of the list was that their managers believed in them, and critically, that they let it show. I've spoken about concepts that can seem at first glance to be quite contradictory, but it's about interaction, not chumminess. Taking time to connect and build relationships is not slacking off, but doing something that will be rewarded with efficiency. Team playing, not to confirm prevailing opinions, but to offer an environment that is safe for constructive conflict, where it is used to find better solutions. And all of these are about building trust. Teams could be more successful and efficient if they are encouraged to grow social capital. An equal voice for all is an important part of this, and a competitive, outspoken, superstar team member could derail the process of forming cohesion within a team. So thank you very much for listening. I am open to some questions if there are any.
Thanks, Diana. So if you do have any questions for Diana, you're able to type those into your questions box that you'll find on your webinar toolbar. So if you have anything to ask Diana, just type your question in there and we can present it to her. So we do have a couple of questions that have come in throughout the session. The first one, Diana, how would you deal with a very quiet member of your team?
This quiet people in the world of programming and stats is not uncommon. It's something that I think most line managers deal with on a fairly regular basis. But there are several things that I do with the quieter members of my team. And what I focus on firstly is really building that team member's self-confidence and trying to make line management meetings an opportunity for honest feedback, and by that I mean their feedback to me rather than my feedback. And I want to ensure that they are building on their self-confidence by becoming confident in the tasks that they are doing, so that eventually if a new team member comes in, then they can explain what they were doing to them, which will also help build their confidence. And I want to make sure that they are comfortable about speaking in meetings, and this can be a little difficult sometimes, but it can be sort of a baby steps approach. So maybe they're involved in meetings that are with smaller number of people, maybe 3 people, and they might be facilitated by myself, so I would always get their opinion, always find out if they've got something to say. And these sorts of activities will slowly build, or in my experience, slowly build confidence, so that eventually the individual feels comfortable about speaking up in larger meetings. And so when we have our big team meeting, which has got 20 odd people in, they would hopefully feel comfortable. We rotate the chair in those types of meetings, so they could get to a point where they would feel happy taking the chair for that meeting. So that would be the next step. I think encouraging and supporting are the words that I use, suggesting ideas to the individual, not forcing tasks on someone that makes them feel really uncomfortable. I think we recognise that we all need to step out of our comfort zone a little bit to progress, but you don't want to chuck people in at the deep end.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned prevailing opinions earlier in the presentation. Could you say a little bit more about the importance of challenging those prevailing opinions?
Yeah, I can. I think this was something that I hadn't considered myself until fairly recently, and I find very, very interesting. It's something I could probably talk about for a really long period of time, but I find it's slightly disconcerting that there are still so many organisations that really want employees to toe the line and not challenge opinion. In the very distant past, I've worked in companies where it's been very much about whether your face fits, and there's much evidence now that companies that have suffered huge losses, either from disaster or by the lack of safety measures, or we've had some negative economic changes going on in the last decade or so, and even the FDA 10 years ago, they all showed evidence of this type of culture. So challenging opinions, challenging the prevailing opinion is essential for anticipating risk. So it's really important that we create a safe environment where people feel that they're able to speak out, give their own opinions, and it takes a great deal of courage. And the benefit, the payoff, is that we can save ourselves a lot of time and money, and we can be ready for the unexpected. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think we've got time for just one more question. Can you recommend any good reading material for someone who is new to line management?
Yes, yeah, I can. I mentioned Margaret Heffernan in the presentation, but I think firstly I would recommend, sort of as a starting point to become inspired almost, there are some really good online presentations. So if you search for Dan Pink on YouTube, he's got an excellent presentation about what drives people, and that might lead you to read his book, which is handily called Drive. And then Simon Sinek has given a couple of TED Talks about leading, and he's got a book called Leaders Eat Last. And then going back to Margaret Heffernan, her TED Talk, she talks about super chickens, which is quite funny, and is very relevant to this. She is my favourite person to talk about social capital, and her TED book Beyond Measure is a very quick and useful read. But she also has other books out, and the one on willful blindness is the other one that I would really recommend. I think line management it's a skill. It's not something you can just do by being promoted. So it's really important that you educate yourself about understanding what motivates people. So with Dan Pink, it's what drives people. With Simon Sinek, it's how to be a great leader. And then Margaret Heffernan was about teams and effective working teams. So you want to decide what sort of leader you want to be, and what sort of environment you want to create for your team to work in. And it's, yeah, so it's about being authoritative and you know, being authoritative. Sorry, it's not about being authoritative. It's but being authoritative is not line managing. So line managing is a completely separate skill, in my opinion.
Thanks, Diana. That was really insightful. So if you would like to listen to the recording of this session, it will be available within a week's time on the website, and we'll be posting a link to that. And if you do have any further questions for Diana, you can get in touch with her via email, and I can share her email address in the post-webinar email. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon, everyone, and have a lovely rest of the day. Thanks, Diana.
Thank you.